Hello, everyone. Welcome back or welcome for the first time. Hi, this is Suspects and Spirits. I'm your host, Taylor Seraphin, and apparently my computer is haunted. I was editing the last two episodes that I've recorded, and I don't know what's happening. I saged my computer. I'm not even joking. I was editing, and you have to listen back, and sometimes you listen over certain parts multiple times. So I pressed preview to see how my edit sounded, and my audio started playing over itself. So, it played from where I edited, and then it played from the beginning, and then it kept doing that. And then it started glitching, like, ip, zip, 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 zip. And I kept pressing stop. I was like, cancel, stop it. And it just got more aggressive. And then this deep guttural noise came out of my headphones and just into my soul. And when I tell you I threw my headphones off my head so fast, I am not okay. What was that? That's never happened before. And apparently, some of you guys are reporting glitches to me as well. But listen, when I edit, I'm very meticulous. At first, when I started this podcast, I was like, there's not going to be a lot of editing. And then I listened to myself when I edit and I was like, oh, why do you say that? Take that out. Why do you say things? And so I'm not even going to leave in a weird noise or a sound if I can help it because I want it to sound clean and not stupid. So if I ever have a glitch in there, just know I use a software that cleans up my audio before publishing. And my audio interface does a pretty good job at ridding background noise and other things. So it's not me, it's the ghost. And I hope it's a ghost at least. That's fine. I'm not scared of ghosts. It's other things I'm scared of. I don't want weird stuff happening. Not on the pod. Well, I don't know. Maybe I do. I like weird things. Anyway, I hope you are doing wonderful. I'm going to bathe in some Palo Santo this evening. So, all right. Now I want to remind you guys here at the top, please go follow on all the things where you follow things. The Instagram, I got a TikTok now, all of that. Go follow it and please rate, review, and subscribe. I have one review right now on Apple Podcasts, and I'm laughing because it has nothing to do with the podcast. It was a personal opinion because apparently I hated on SV Sierra Vista in my first episode. So it was a comment, a review about episode 1, and they didn't even listen to the whole episode. They were just like, "Hey, I stopped listening after you hated on Sierra Vista." So listen, I don't hate Sierra Vista. I grew up there. It was a lovely little town, truly wonderful, nice tight-knit community. I don't hate it there. But there isn't much to do. Where is the lie? I don't know. So I'm sorry if I offended anybody with my Sierra Vista hatred. I really don't hate it there. I was just saying it's a small town with not a lot to do. So if you guys want to go give me another review, that would be great instead of just having that one there. There's 5-star reviews and stuff, which is fantastic. 5 stars, woo, 5 stars. But the reviews are also very important. So if you guys could head on over, show the podcast some love, and show the website some love too. We are getting some really great submissions for Booze Clues. I'm so excited to start that segment. Who knows? By this time, when you're listening to this, I could have already started it. I don't know. But I got some good stories and I cannot wait to share them with you. And if I already have, you're welcome. All right. Anyways, enough business talk. Let's get started. Today's story, it is a long one and listen, it sent me spiraling. Okay. My flabbers are gasted. I mean, you think you know a guy. I mean, I thought I did. I thought I knew about this guy, but I didn't. Not even a little bit. I went deep into the rabbit hole, and baby, I am not okay. This story, I have no words. Just no words, okay, except for the ones I wrote down as notes to tell you about this. So just bear with me, and we can all get frustrated together. Today, we are going to be discussing Charles Cullen, also known as Angel of Death or the Killer Nurse. So who was Charles? Charles Cullen's story starts in West Orange, New Jersey, where he was born on February 22nd, 1960, making him a Pisces. Nothing against a Pisces. We love you, Pisces. That's just what he was. Charles was the youngest of 8 kids in a working class Catholic family. And one could say that from the very beginning, his life filled with despair rather quickly. Just 7 months into his life, his father, Edmund, a bus driver, died suddenly, leaving behind a grieving wife and a house full of children. Could you imagine 8 kids by yourself? Whew. Baby, no thank you. I love kids. I'm a teacher. I love kids, but I don't want 8 of them in my home by myself. That sounds hard. I props to single moms. I don't know how you guys do it. I really, really don't. I have 2, and it's difficult. So, okay, big family, single mom, probably a hard time, right? Cullen would later describe his childhood with one word: miserable. He said he was tormented by bullies at school and even by his sister's boyfriends at home. And at just 9 years old, he actually attempted suicide, which is awful. You always feel really bad for kids in these scenarios. Looking back at their childhood, you feel bad for them. You empathize with them. You have sympathy for them. But once they're grown up and they do awful things, it's hard to feel bad anymore. But the early years of a child's life are so developmentally important. I mean, like we've said before, there's a lot to it. Not all kids with miserable childhoods grow up to be monsters. But unfortunately, that is not the case for Charles. Otherwise, why are we here? We wouldn't be here talking about him if that were the case. So, Charles, at only 9 years old, decided to attempt to end his life by drinking chemicals from a toy chemistry set. While it obviously did not kill him, it did make him violently ill. And this was the first of many attempts to end his life. Charles's mother, Florence, was said to be the only constant in his life. She was an English war bride who'd come to America after World War II. She was the only parent he had left, and from what I could gather in my research, he did have admiration and love for his mother. But again, life would take a turn for the worse for Charles when one day, in December of 1977, his mother was killed in a car crash. Charles was 17 at the time, a high school senior, and the loss absolutely shattered him. Now, he was left with no parents, almost legally an adult, and no one to help him figure out how to handle the challenges of life. What haunted him the most, though, wasn't just the death of his mother, but more so the hospital's cold handling of it. According to Charles, he said they never told him she had died, and they just cremated her without asking. I know it was the 70s, but isn't there some kind of process even back then? Like, don't you notify the family, the next of kin? Someone let me know. If you're listening, please let me know. Because if that's really what happened, and I could understand holding a grudge against the hospital industry. Now, if you know this story, you know what he goes on to do, and it does not excuse any of his awful behavior. But I could understand holding a grudge if that's really what happened. So now, parentless and still at the very tender age of 17, he has to finish out high school as an orphan. And clearly, his relationship with his sisters isn't that great. So he feels very alone at this time. At the end of the school year, he did graduate and he ended up joining the U.S. Navy, serving aboard the USS Woodrow Wilson, a nuclear missile submarine. Now, I think it's pretty common knowledge. Like, we know that to get into the military, you have to pass a series of psychological screenings, which, thank God, right? You need to be in the right mind when entering the military. And that brings me to my next opinion. And you can agree with me or disagree with me. But the craziest part about this story to me is that this man who clearly, I mean, he already had some issues, right? Because again, hello, welcome to true crime. It's so wild to me that he passed these screenings. He passed all the psychological screenings with flying colors, and they gave him access to weapons, nuclear weapons. Just wild, wild to me. Eventually, he got the rank of Petty Officer Second Class. Now, I had to look this up because, I mean, I have family in the military, but I don't know a whole lot about the Navy. And from what I found, that's not a high ranking. And I wouldn't assume so because of the word petty and second class. Those aren't nice words to refer to somebody. Why do they call them that? Now, even though he had passed those psych screenings and seemed like a pretty normal guy beneath the surface, underneath, Cullen was unraveling. His time in the Navy was not unlike his experiences growing up. Charles just didn't fit in with the crew. He was hazed, mocked, and overall his experience was just not a good time. And then there was an incident that shocked all of his fellow sailors and his superiors. One day, another petty officer found Charles in the control room, seated at the missile controls, and he wasn't in his uniform. Charles was wearing scrubs, gloves, and a surgical mask. When he was discovered there and his buddy was like, "Hey, what you doing?" Charles gave no explanation, just eerie silence. That was overall pretty concerning for those around him. No one knew why he was dressed that way, just hanging out with nuclear missiles. Although he was asked, what the hell he was doing there, he never gave an answer. He was disciplined eventually and reassigned to a supply ship, which, thank goodness, get him away from the missiles. After his transfer, though, he attempted suicide several more times and was hospitalized repeatedly in the Navy psych ward. In 1984, he was quietly discharged on medical grounds. But the story didn't end there. He had to find his calling. And apparently, his calling was nursing, which would be amazing if he wasn't such a douche. Cullen ended up enrolling in nursing school at Mountainside Hospital in Montclair, New Jersey. Now, Charles was smart. Okay, there's no arguing his intelligence. He even became class president during his time in nursing school and was actually the only male enrolled at the time. He seemed to really enjoy nursing school and he was good at what he did. He was a hard worker too. He worked his way through college at different jobs and he was really thriving. He's like, finally, I found a place where I belong. This could have been a wonderful turning point for him. But no. The same year that Charles would graduate in 1986, he also met a woman named Adrienne Baum. Charles wanted to move things along really fast with Adrienne. He bought her flowers and expensive gifts. She actually had a boyfriend at the time, but this really didn't prevent Charles from pursuing her. And eventually, she and that boyfriend broke up. So Charles decided this would be the perfect time to reel her in. Anything she liked, he happened to also like. Eventually, the two began dating, and he seemed like such a loving and attentive boyfriend. And within only 6 months of pursuing Adrian, Charles proposed. That same year, they also got married. Yikes. He was love bombing hard, man. So in that same year, Charles and Adrian married. Charles graduated, and right after he graduated, he was offered a job at St. Barnabas Medical Center. Lots going on for him at this time, right? Sounds great. Many good things here. I wish the story could have gone differently, but sadly, that's just not why we're here. After accepting his new nursing position, he and Adrian had actually gone on their honeymoon, and he was so eager to begin his new job, he actually asked his wife if they could come home a day early because he couldn't wait to get started. That's kind of weird, right? Plenty of people love their jobs. They get excited to get started, but to leave your honeymoon early because of your job, I don't know about all that. I don't know. That's weird. I'm sure Adrian was kind of taken aback by this too, but nonetheless, she supported him and they returned from the honeymoon and he began working in the burn unit at St. Barnabas. Am I saying that right? I think so. St. Barnabas Medical Center. Later, he and Adrian would have two daughters. They also had dogs. They had little Yorkshire Terriers. From the outside, everything seemed lovely. He had gotten a great job. He married the woman he loved. They seemingly had a wonderful life. Adrian loved how driven he was, and she loved his intelligence. But soon after, Charles began displaying very disturbing behavior behind closed doors. Adrian would later describe his behavior, and oh my, it is concerning. Adrian said that Charles liked to spike people's drinks with lighter fluid, that he would burn his daughter's books, and this is a trigger for animal cruelty. I'm sorry. Charles would take the family dogs into the basement and beat them. Adrian said on more than one account she woke up to the whimpering and crying of the dogs. And when she confronted Charles, he said that's just how he gets them to listen to him. And if that isn't bad enough, Adrian also said that Charles used to force their dogs into bowling bags, like bowling ball bags or trash cans, and he would keep them there for hours. I want to punch this guy in the throat. Hurting innocent animals is one of the most disgusting things a person can do. Aside from hurting kids, like this is right up there. People who do that deserve a life of purgatory. Satan doesn't even want you. So, yeah, Charles was very deranged, and his wife was becoming extremely terrified and concerned. So now this asshat is also in charge of the well-being of humans who are in very vulnerable condition. He's working in a burn unit, and Charles knew this. He also knew that in the ICU where he worked, this is where there just happened to be the most amount of sudden deaths than in any other part of the hospital. ICUs are a very fragile place. Sometimes, patients seem to be doing better and getting stable, and then suddenly they pass away. It's a really difficult job to be an ICU nurse. So, any nurses listening, thank you. We appreciate you. And this man does not represent you at all. So, we love you and appreciate you. For Charles, this setting was a perfect storm. He had already started planning on how to kill his patients quietly and efficiently. He was known as a very sharp, reliable nurse, someone who blended into the sterile hum of hospital life without raising any suspicion. No one questioned his movements as he wandered the halls, chart in hand, mask on his face, hiding the dark obsession festering beneath him. The violent urges had long outgrown the sick thrill of tormenting the dogs at home. That wasn't enough for him anymore. Now his fantasies focused on innocent people who just lay helpless in the ICU. To Charles, the patients weren't people, they were opportunities. He studied them with a predator's calm, memorizing routines, noting which rooms were left unwatched, and exactly where the hospital stored its most lethal drugs. He understood the system better than most, and more dangerously, he knew how to exploit it. After just 2 years at the hospital, Charles felt untouchable. On June 11th, 1988, he finally decided to commit his first murder. This was the perfect timing for him. He'd been there 2 years. No one suspected him of anything. And why would they, right? You're supposed to be helping people. So this is when he decided to act on his impulses. His first victim's name was Judge John Yango Sr. He had been admitted following a bad reaction to a blood thinner. He was weak, resting, hooked to an IV, and in came Charles. He never even questioned the nurse who entered his room, because that's what happens in a hospital. Charles wore the uniform, and he seemed harmless. And then Charles added something to John's IV. Of course, this poor man didn't think anything of this. Why would he? People add things to IVs all the time in the hospital. Soon after, though, John would be found by hospital staff, and he had passed away. Now, this did strike the hospital staff and others as a little bit odd. He had just come in for an allergic reaction. This should have been an easy case to handle. As far as they knew, this patient didn't have any known medical conditions that would have interfered with the medications provided to him. But of course, they didn't know Charles had gone into his room. Now, having gotten away with this, Charles was feeling pretty confident. He began lurking around patient rooms and roaming the halls in search of his next victim. And he found him. This one just makes me really, really mad. I mean, they're all awful, but this one just really got me when I read about it. So his next victim was actually an AIDS patient. Just how shitty do you have to be? This person's already extremely sick. And this was at the peak of the AIDS epidemic. It was all still extremely new. Just to target somebody who's already so weak and vulnerable makes me very angry. Charles ended up sneaking into this patient's room when they were alone and administering a huge dose of insulin, which he knew would just instantly kill him. Charles worked at St. Barnabas for 5 years. In those 5 years, it's believed that he killed a total of 11 people. You go to school to spend all this time learning how to prevent death and make people more comfortable in their awful condition, only to end up murdering them? What a piece of shit. Charles ended up actually leaving this hospital, not because he was bored or because he wanted a new hunting ground, but because authorities were starting to connect the dots. So Charles left in 1992 and he started a new job and a new life with his family in Phillipsburg, New Jersey. And yes, he was still with Adrian at this time. You'd think after authorities starting to catch on that his former employer would do something, say something, but they did absolutely nothing. Others definitely suspected Charles of something, but apparently they just decided not to contact his next employer or to warn them, or I don't know, tell the police to bring him in for questioning at the very least. So now Charles is at Warren Hospital and he decides, you know who's super vulnerable? Sick, elderly women. This guy is the worst. I don't like him. Now, these murders are sort of what made Charles infamous for the way he chose to go about killing his victims. He actually used something that was readily available to him, once again, and this time it became routine. Charles chose to use a drug called digoxin, a medication meant to save lives. It was actually a medication used to treat congestive heart failure, but in Charles Cullen's hands, it became a silent killer. Late at night, when the halls of Warren Hospital were quiet and the families had gone home, Charles would creep into the locked medication cabinets and steal deadly doses of this drug. Then he would slip into his victims' rooms, always after hours, always when no one was watching. The first two women he chose to kill this way were gone in an instant. But death didn't always come so quickly. Sometimes the poison wasn't strong enough and he had to adjust his doses. And that's what happened with his third victim at Warren Hospital, 91-year-old Helen Dean. One night, as she lay in her hospital bed, she noticed a male nurse slipped into her room, very quietly. He didn't speak. He didn't even look at her. He just walked over. And if you've ever been in the hospital, you know this is not typical, especially if you've ever met a doctor or nurse coming into the room. They always greet you. They introduce themselves. They let you know what they're doing there. They check in and they chat with you. Nurses are like God-sent creatures from planet Selfless, and they usually try to make the interactions pleasant and kind. But Charles just creeped into her room. He didn't say a single word. Then, before poor Ellen knew what was happening, Charles had jabbed her leg with a needle, injecting something she didn't recognize. Thankfully, Helen survived the night. The next morning, when her family visited, she told them about this strange man who came in while she was alone. She called him sneaky and said something was just off about him. She knew something wasn't right. Her family, though, kind of brushed it aside. I mean, she was 91. They thought maybe she was confused or the drug she was on at the time had her very groggy and seeing or dreaming things. But unfortunately, they would later learn that she was absolutely right, because by the next day, sweet old Helen had passed away. Now, her son Harry, he was feeling very suspicious after her death. He remembered what she had mentioned about the male nurse, and he got this intuitive feeling that she was telling the truth because something had gone wrong. He was very overwhelmed with guilt because he felt if he had just believed his mom, that maybe he could have said something or done something. So Harry became determined to figure out what really happened to his mother. Unfortunately, there was nothing immediately leading Harry to conclude that this person was Charles. So Charles kept on with his twisted behavior. At this point, not only was he unhinging at work and almost getting into a frenzy-like state of killing more patients, but things were also getting worse at home. He was becoming extremely sneaky and just lying constantly. Things were not adding up for his wife. And on top of that, he was treating everyone in his family, including the dogs, horribly. The abuse had only gotten worse. In 1993, Adrienne had finally had enough and decided to divorce Charles. She even filed for a restraining order. She believed that Charles was mentally ill. But being the stand up guy he is, Charles just denied everything. He said, "Nah, that's not me." Now, I don't know why, and I won't pretend to understand why, but Adrienne ended up going 50-50 for custody with Charles. That part makes me upset, but I was not in her position. I don't know what she went through, so I'm just going to say that's what she did. But, this guy, he clearly doesn't care about his kids. He is an awful human. And I don't care if it's every other weekend. Please do not leave those kids with him. And you know what? He proved he couldn't even be bothered to be around during the times that he did have his kids, because he, on at least one occasion that Adrian was aware of, just up and left. Charles disappeared and left the kids with a babysitter for an entire week. Like, at least he didn't leave them alone. At least he got a sitter, but a week? What the fuck? Like, what? I'm sorry. Can't wrap my head around it. I don't know. Now, you would think all of this would start coming to an end. He's killed over 11 people that we know of so far, but unfortunately, Charles was just getting started. After the divorce, Charles moved to Phillipsburg. He was actually thinking of quitting nursing because his life was just falling apart around him and he was exhausted from the emotional turmoil that he brought upon himself. But he had child support to pay and he continued working. This is when Charles really starts to descend into chaos. I mean, we thought it was bad before, but baby, hold on to your butts. Around March 1993, shortly after his divorce, Charles wasn't just prowling for new victims, but had actually started stalking a woman he worked with. So now he's escalating. And I don't mean he's just following her around at work or, to her home, which is still would be terrible. Charles went as far as to actually break into this woman's home at night while she and her son slept and just walked around and stared at them while they slept. Then he started calling her incessantly and leaving copious amounts of voicemails for her, just blabbering on and on. Truly terrifying behavior, like nightmare fuel. That poor woman. Now, Charles did also follow her around at work and even around town. But eventually she said, "Fuck this," and she went to the police to file a formal complaint. Thankfully, they arrested Charles for stalking, and he had another failed suicide attempt shortly after. After his interrogation, he pleaded guilty to trespassing and was put on probation for a year. During that time, he was not working. He was in and out of mental hospitals and attempted suicide 2 more times. How many times are you going to attempt this? Finally, Charles had quit his job and was at least attempting to seek help, but this would be very short lived because he was now behind on his child support payments and racking up debt. He had to go back to work. So at Hunter Medical Center's ICU in Rarity Township, New Jersey, Charles found a new hunting ground. This job seemed to be okay. As far as we know, he didn't kill anyone here for the first 2 years that he worked there. But like most serial killers, this was likely just a cool off period because in 1996, he had killed at least 5 more that we know of. One was a school teacher, another was a correctional supervisor. He had also murdered a farmer, a store clerk, and an attorney. All of these people had gone to the hospital for treatment of some kind and were trusting the people there to help them get better. And Charles took full advantage of their vulnerability and his position. This is where I get extremely frustrated with this case because he leaves this job and gets another nursing job. Like, please, please, someone check this man's work history. Call his previous supervisors because what are you doing? Please check on him. Now, thankfully, though, after he moved to this new hospital, Morris Memorial in New Jersey, he was fired very shortly after due to poor performance. So Charles began to unravel once again. Boo hoo. and actually went to seek help at his previous job at Warren Hospital. He begged for them to treat him, and they did because they're good people. He was put in a psych unit for depression, but he complained the whole time. He complained that they weren't helping him with his depression and it was just worsening, so he didn't stay long. When he returned home, his behavior became very erratic and strange. Neighbors complained about his odd behaviors. He would do things like chase cats, wander around making faces at people and talking to himself. Sometimes he would just scream. How unsettling. So Charles went through a series of mental breakdowns and after some time began to feel more stable. In February of 1998, he found a job at the Liberty Nursing and Rehabilitation Center in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Charles had to file for bankruptcy shortly after landing that job. I don't know, guys. Stop hiring this guy, please. What is happening? This isn't even the last hospital he worked at. Oh my God. I can't even keep track anymore. I'm sorry. Are you with me? My goodness. Now, he was let go from this hospital because coworkers and others started noticing his bizarre behavior, like giving patients, drugs and unscheduled times or walking into their rooms with syringes. Like, why do you have that? Why is that in your hand? What are you doing? Now, we're not aware of any killings that occurred here. Thankfully, it didn't seem like he succeeded at this hospital. But he did leave a patient's room and somehow the patient ended up with a broken arm. So, like, not good. He was like, I have no idea how that happened, but I didn't kill anyone. And he didn't. So, anyways, they fired him. This is insane. How does he have this many jobs and then he keeps getting fired or like leaving for some reason? So, time goes on, and shortly thereafter, he is hired at yet another hospital. And again, he began killing. This time, Charles was working for Elston Hospital. That's hard to say. I want to say Elton, but I know it's not. Elston Hospital in Pennsylvania. This was November of 1998 when he was hired. And by the end of December, Charles had already killed a 78-year-old patient, once again using the drug digoxin. They did do an autopsy on this patient, and there was clear as day digoxin in the bloodstream, a lethal amount, in fact. But there is absolutely no evidence to suggest that Charles had done anything. So he, of course, kept going. This guy job hopped so many times, and it did not help that there was a nursing crisis at the time, apparently. I was in my research, I found that there was like a nursing shortage. So, I mean, the shortage was very bad. They seemed to be hiring anyone they could find. And since none of his previous employers had bothered to report anything to his new employers, it just kept happening. And vice versa. His new employers were not checking his references or even bothering to call anyone at all. So everyone is guilty here. If someone had just taken 1 minute to verify his work history, this could be a very different story. So I'd love to tell you that he was finally arrested after this hospital experience, but he actually went and found jobs at 2 more hospitals after this. 2. Dos. Killing a total, again, that we are aware of 6 more patients. Charles was now back to his suicide attempts. But for this particular instance, he placed a charcoal grill in his bathtub. He lit the coals and he just sat there, hoping that the carbon monoxide would kill him. Interesting way to do that. But of course, others smelled this and the neighbors reported it to the authorities because, that smell would be concerning. So he survived. Again. And this is one of 20 attempts to take his own life. I guess the universe was just like, nah, bitch, you're not getting off that easy. God said, I don't even want to deal with you. Just cut it out. So after this, Charles was actually put back into a psychiatric facility, but he only spent like 1 night there. And guess what he did after that? He got back to work. He killed more people. And this time, he's working at St. Luke's Hospital. And finally, fucking finally, a coworker was like, something is not right with this Charles guy. And this coworker reported he had found used medication in one of those like biohazard bins. So they found out that Charles had been using this medication, but they didn't know what for. So they fired him right away. And this was in 2002, by the way, June 2002. But the hospital said, that's it. That's all they were going to do is just let him go. They didn't call the police. They didn't take any legal action. They just said, okay, bye. So now this made his coworkers upset. Finally, someone's getting upset. They knew he was guilty of more, and they wanted justice for any wrongdoings that Charles had committed. They weren't really sure what he had done, but they wanted to do more about this situation. They didn't feel firing him was enough. So 7 of his old coworkers from this hospital decided to meet with an attorney and call the authorities. Good. Thank you. Good for you guys. That's way more than anyone else has done. My goodness, it's been over a decade. Over a decade he's been doing this. Now, these former coworkers claim that Charles has been present for 2/3 of the deaths at this hospital. No one's that unlucky in their job. That's excessive. Excessive. 2/3 of the deaths he has been present for. But the police didn't look into his work history or any of his past, really. They just did a small investigation, and that was it. So 9 months later, the case was just dropped. They said there's not enough evidence to pursue Charles as the cause for these deaths. Ugh. Do some basic research. Like, this story is so aggravating. Breathe, Taylor. So now Charles is back to work. My God, back to work again. This time he's in New Jersey again, and he is at Somerset Medical Center, and he even has a girlfriend. But his depression begins to worsen again, and he's spiraling. He's said to have killed 8 more patients at this hospital. Among these patients were war veterans. Like, fuck off, dude. Mr. I was in the Navy. He can't even respect the veterans at his job. He's got to kill them. To kill these men who so selflessly fought for their rights for their fellow people, and 2 of these men had actually helped to liberate a concentration camp. These men were actual heroes. They sought help at a hospital, and their lives were just taken from them. Charles Cullen is such a monster. I have no words for him. Now, thankfully, our story is beginning to come to an end. Are you still with me? Thank you. It's almost over, I promise. This piece of shit gets caught. That's why we know about him. So finally, rumors began to go around at the hospital about Charles. No one trusted him. He was getting cocky and also sloppy. So we see this often with serial killers. Sometimes they go through a cool-off period and then they go through a frenzy and they start to get sloppy, and that's when they get caught. But I mean, do you blame him also? Look at everything he's gotten away with. My gosh. Thankfully, at this time, someone with a brain, thought to look into the computer system. And they noticed that Charles had been accessing records to patients, which isn't abnormal, but they realized that the patients he was accessing, he was not assigned to any of them that he was looking into, which is weird. Why are you looking at them then? In 2003, the state hired someone to look into the deaths of the patients. Others had begun to see Charles do odd things once again, but this time they thought to actually follow through. He was seen doing all of his typical creepy shit, including accessing medications that these patients were prescribed, the ones he wasn't assigned to. He was also seen going into the patients' rooms, and somehow they were ending up dead. Weird. So they got a pathologist involved. And after reviewing 67 cases, 67, you guys, it was determined that there was not enough proof. They didn't exhume any bodies. Only a few autopsies were actually done. And they didn't even interview Charles. They didn't even bother to ask him anything. Like, ask him one question. Just ask him one. Hey, my question. Why are you looking into that patient that's not yours? Why are so many people dying around you? Any of those would be great. Even though at the time they didn't have nearly enough evidence to bring Charles to trial, they kept on with the investigation. In July 2003, the executive director of the New Jersey Poison Information and Education System contacted Somerset Medical Center. They told them that multiple patient overdoses bore the distinct signs of foul play, likely at the hands of an insider. The implication was clear. Someone on staff was intentionally administering lethal doses. Finally, something that they can prove. But despite the severity of the warning, the hospital failed to notify law enforcement for another 3 months. 3 months. This is the hospital's fault at this point. Like, how do you not report that? Error on the side of caution, overreact. Like, if you're wrong, okay, but at least you took action. And their lack of action took a very devastating toll because during their silence, Charles Cullen claimed 5 more lives and then attempted a 6th murder. In August, when a patient suffered a suspicious insulin overdose, the hospital still withheld the incident from the authorities. An omission that later resulted in state penalties. And it wasn't until October, after another patient died from an unexplained drop in blood sugar, that Somerset Medical finally broke its silence and reported the deaths to state officials. Are you kidding me? They warned you. They told you. It took 5 more people dying for you to be like, maybe we should say something. This is why I told you at the beginning that this case is so frustrating. So finally, they conducted a comprehensive and detailed investigation into Charles's past. That is when they realized he was responsible for many deaths. On October 31st, 2003, the hospital finally decided to fire Charles. Not because he killed people, though. Apparently, they fired him for lying on his application. Guys, get it together. What is up with this hospital? Fire him for potentially, allegedly, quote unquote, killing your patients, and then make sure no one hires him again. Finally, after years of hiding in plain sight, Charles was arrested on December 12th, 2003, on 1 count of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. It only took Cullen 2 days to confess to 2 murders. 2 days. That's all it took. This guy cracked so fast. They should have just questioned him much earlier. Like, could you imagine? Eventually, Charles admitted to murdering over 40 patients in his 16 years working as a nurse. Charles claims that his motive was to end the unnecessary suffering of patients, that he didn't want them being codes, which is basically just hospital slang for going into cardiac arrest, which, okay, dude. Some of the people you killed weren't even terminal. What about John, who came in for a simple allergic reaction? Sorry, that was bullshit. They always come up with an excuse, right? Although Charles admitted to his crimes, he was extremely difficult during the court proceedings. He would only cooperate and tell them the names of his victims if they agreed not to seek the death penalty. Now, these families wanted closure, and the courts were under a lot of pressure, so they agreed. And Charles did end up naming as many victims as he could. Later on, Charles would admit that he killed due to impulse, not mercy, which, yeah, we know. Even then, even after getting the death penalty off the table, Charles continued to be difficult during the trial. At one point, he kept taunting and harassing the judge, telling the judge he needed to step down. The judge, who was Judge Armstrong in New Jersey, he ended up sentencing Cullen to 18 consecutive life sentences. Later on in March 2006, Cullen would go back to court, and this time in Pennsylvania. This guy, again, he just went on, taunting and harassing the judge. They ended up having to gag Charles with a cloth and put duct tape over his mouth because he just wouldn't shut up. And he still tried to talk. Still. This judge, Judge Platt, had enough of this behavior and was disgusted by his crimes, and he ended up sentencing him to 6 additional life sentences. Charles is still alive. He is currently in prison in the New Jersey State Prison in Trenton. He is not eligible for parole until June 10th of 2000 403. One of the saddest parts of this story to me is that Harry, the son of Helen, he passed away in 2001. Harry did, and he never got to find Charles and figure out what really happened to his mom, which makes me so sad. Just 2 years before they finally got him. I hope Harry and the other families have found some, sense of peace and justice. What an awful experience. Now, at this time, I would actually like to list Charles's victims and attempted victims just so that we're aware of the severity of the case, so that we understand how monstrous this man was and just how many lives he took, and also to give the victims a voice. All right, so his victims include John Yango Sr., who was 72, Lucy Viglione Mugavero, who was 90, Mary Natoli, 85, Helen Dean, 91, Leroy Sin, who was 71, Earl Young, 76, Catherine A. Dext, 49, Frank Mazzacco, 66, Jesse Eichlin, 81, Audemars A. Schramm, 78, Matthew Mattern was only 22, Stella Danielsic was attempted murder, John Gallagher also attempted murder. Then there's Irene Crumpf, 79, William Park, 72, Paul Galgan, 72, he was attempted, Samuel Spangler, 80 years old, Daniel George, 82, Edward O'Toole, 76, Eleanor Stoker, 60, Joyce E. Mangini, 74, Giacomino J. Toto, 89, John J. Shanager, 83, Dorothea Hoagland, 80, Melvin Simcoe, 66, Michael T. Strenko was only 21, Philip Gregor was attempted, he was 48, Reverend Florian Gall, 68, Jin Kyung Han, 40, attempted murder, Pascal Napolitano, 80, Christopher Hardgrove, 38, Francis Agoda, 83, attempted murder, Krishnakant Upday, 70, James R. Strickland, 83, and Edward P. Sizik, 73 years old. Those are the lists of the victims that we are aware of. He took a lot of lives, but there was some good to come from this in the sense of patient advocacy. Because of how long it took for action to be taken and Charles to be caught, Pennsylvania and New Jersey and 35 other states adopted new laws which encourage employers to give honest appraisals of workers' job performance and provide legal protections for reporting medical errors. A 2004 Patient Safety Act increased hospitals' responsibility for reporting serious preventable adverse events. Then, the 2005 Enhancement Act, which was a supplement to the Patient Safety Act, required hospitals to report certain details on their employees to the New Jersey Division of Consumer Affairs, and mandated that complaints and disciplinary records relating to patient care be kept for at least 7 years. So that's good. I mean, I don't know why it took so long. In my research, I found that other people were actually reporting Charles kind of indirectly and informally, but nothing was ever done. Hospitals didn't want lawsuits. For example, Cullen took a job at Sacred Heart Hospital in June 2001, and a nurse who had heard rumors about him at Easton Hospital kind of gave a heads up to her coworkers. After everyone started to catch on and find out about Charles, the nurses all threatened to quit if Charles was not immediately dismissed, which he was. So people definitely knew. It's just that the hospitals didn't do shit. At least we know Charles won't be out anytime soon, and the judges threw the book at him. May he rot in his cell. They did end up making a movie about this. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It's called The Good Nurse, starring Eddie Redmayne. Any fellow Potterheads out there, you guys will know Eddie Redmayne as Newt from Fantastic Beasts. He was also in Les Mis. So if you want to watch that, it's very well done. There's also a documentary called Capturing the Killer Nurse. It's on Netflix. Also very good. I didn't use either of these for this episode. I happened to have watched them a while back. I think it's been a few years now. And I wanted to mention them here in case you guys wanted more information about this guy or you wanted to see the movie for yourself. But Yeah, that is all I have for you today. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. Please go get those reviews going. And I'm going to go scrub my brain now. And you should listen to yours. Remember to trust your lizard brain. Until next time, my little true crime nerds, goodbye.